At some point, people will come to this realization that, hang on, I have just inherited these beliefs. And that's not healthy, because what we need to do, what we actually everybody really does, is they choose their beliefs. And you get to choose your beliefs. And the beliefs that you should choose are the beliefs that help you become the best version of yourself, and the beliefs that give you a purpose greater than yourself.
Hello and welcome back to Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Tickle, and our guest today is Jeremy Steele. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. He's very fascinating. I find him very fascinating, and the subject that we're going to talk about is going to be great. So he is a skeptic and a pastor, and he has over 25 years helping skeptics, mystics, church people, and agnostics, and everyone in between connect with the divine and become the best version of themselves. So welcome, Jeremy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, and I'm just happy to be on the show with you. I'm also in the middle of a book tour, so this is called How to Not Suck as a Christian. It's my book that me and this community that we have on TikTok sort of collaborated on what the chapters would be, and I know that we're going to talk about toxic masculinity, and
yes,
there's all kinds of permutations of that. But there's a group called the Trevor Project that I'm splitting the royalties with of this book with them, and sort of raising awareness of their work and what they do. They offer free therapy to LGBTQ young people, and so the Trevor Project is amazing work. They have a 24-hour a crisis therapy. I mean, it's just, and it's online. And so, they're a fantastic organization.
Sounds like a great cause and unfortunately really needed. So yeah, I will be reading that book, because I just found out just before I pushed the record button that you wrote that book. So I will definitely be reading that. Yeah. Today's subject is really interesting. It's toxic masculinity for men and boys in church. Mm-hmm. And as I had mentioned before we started recording, I love your videos, and I love that you bring kind of a reality to all of us.
Yeah.
And I agree with so much that you say. And I kept wanting to find a way to get you on my podcast. And then you started talking. You did a video on toxic masculinity for men and boys in church. I'm like, there it is. That's what we need to talk about, because I know that that's very prevalent. So explain to us exactly what that means.
Yeah. So toxic masculinity is this like overly, I've never actually tried to define it. But it's like this overly masculine, like the almost like a caricature of men and masculinity. That
they're so over the top, right?
Yeah. And so like the toxic, what's toxic about this idea that, men, that men have to be sporty, that men have to have, deep voices, and that men have to be attracted to women, and
they have to be tough.
They have
right?
to be tough, right? They've got to suck it up. They are not supposed to show their emotions, or they, basically, it's funny because in this world that we are in right now, like one of the values that's asserted in toxic masculinity is really basically they need to have a low EQ, like a low emotional intelligence. And
so true.
And it's just this like very rigid gender roles that are defined outside of these men and boys in a way that it hurts them, but it also hurts relationships with women. It also, when these guys are trans or are queer, it is this like just internalized struggle of like what it means to be a man, and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
it gets even more confusing for them, I'm sure, right? So
Yeah.
just being a man can be difficult, and then you add that on top of it. And I had a pastor say to me one time that, and I think this is true, that men and women, we all have the same emotions. It's just women are allowed to kind of share their emotions, where men, the only emotion they're really allowed to share is their anger.
Yeah. There's a book that came out, oh man, years and years ago called Real Boys
Mm.
that explored that exact issue. In that it's really, there's some fascinating research where when you ask girls that are in their teens to sort of write out all the different words for emotions, they have this like massive list, and
Mm.
boys, teenage boys, have this just like tiny list, because exactly what you said. Oftentimes, they're allowed to be angry,
Uh-huh.
and that's it. Angry, maybe sad, right? Angry and sad. But yeah, it's wild. And, the another piece, especially in the sort of fundamentalist evangelical church, is this idea of male headship, that men are supposed to be the leaders in their house with their partners and family, but also in the church itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so where did that, I mean, do you think that that dynamic came from, of course, Christ is the head of the church, right? And we see Christ as a man, right?
Yeah.
And so it's been because I'll be honest, and I shared it with you before the recording, is I don't have a problem with God at all. Me
Right.
me and God have been tight for as long as I can remember. It's
Right.
been man that's come along, and in some
Yeah.
cases definitely men, but women as well, that have really kind of messed up that balance for me, and created a lot of confusion for me, and there was a lot of questions I had that I carried inside of me for years.
Hmm.
So, where do you think that started, and why is it carried on to today in today's
Uh,
churches?
yeah. Well, I think it's really, it has very little to do with religion and church, and a whole lot to do with culture. And so, when you
Yeah.
when you go back in time, these cultures were patriarchal cultures in general, especially in the Western world, where Christianity and Judaism sort of are birthed and grow into these massive movements. These are patriarchal cultures into which these things are being born. And one of the things that is clear is that while there are moments, and there is a progression into more and more freedom, agency, all of that for women, the those movements, they were very much of that culture, of that
Hmm.
time, and so there was very little, like, you know culture. It's like air. Like, we don't notice it, we don't think about it. Culture just is,
Yeah.
and so it is very difficult to, even for most people on any given day, to notice the things that are just culturally defined,
Hmm.
right? And so you just live, you just swim in that pool, you walk in that air, and so that's why you have those same patriarchal, misogynistic values reflected in the sacred text and in the growth of these religious movements, and it continues on throughout even Jesus and the early church. However, there is a there is a breaking of some of that happens in early Christianity, and you'll actually, it's really fascinating. You see it the very first time you see it in the biblical text is in the genealogy of Jesus,
Hmm.
because you're thinking, like, this father had this son who had this son who had this son who had this son who had Jesus. But in Jesus' genealogy, you have these women named, right? Tamar, Rahab, and just powerful, strong women,
Yes.
Ruth, and so you see that beginning to, like, break through, and then by the time Christianity is happening, there are women in the early part of the church just completely in leadership. There's a woman named Junia that's referenced, and so you've got these women that are like in leadership, and Jesus's ministry is funded by women. So you see this progression, and then the powers that be, when Christianity begins to grow into something bigger than just this random, movement, and it begins to amass cultural power and influence in these very patriarchal, masculine dominated cultures like Rome in the early hundreds. The women's power is just taken away, and yeah, I think that's sort of the trajectory.
Hey, thank you for listening so far. If you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you won't ever miss an episode. Yeah, because I as you were mentioning those names, and I think about, I'll be honest, it's been a few years since I've actually studied my Bible, but I studied it for 30 plus years.
Right.
But there were a lot of strong women in the early years, and they talk about it a lot. And then now, the last church I went to even said, my wife will never be up on the stage speaking to the congregation. That is not allowed in this church. And I was like, are you kidding me? Because, and I'll be honest, the one person in my life who I have followed throughout since 1996, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I believe 100% is Joyce Meyer. And she is powerful. And I love what she has to say. And I love how authentic she is. And I'm thinking, this woman has made it. And I don't watch any TV pastors. This is the only one. But she has affected people all over the world. Why would we want to take that away? Right. Why would we take that away? Because somebody's interpreting what the Bible says as, it only should be man teaching the congregation. I couldn't put those two together. It's like, you're going to take this, so this person should not be doing any ministry that's affecting people all over the world because it doesn't fit within your interpretation of what the Bible says.
Right. And, what that does on so first off, it allows men and boys to have a sense of control over the lives of women that is unhealthy. Mm-hmm. Unhealthy is the nicest way to put it, mm-hmm. right? And it creates perceptions and relational dynamics that just do the worst kinds of things, both to the men who are who their egos are not put in check, who are not asked to empathize with women, with the women in their life, who are not asked to do any of that, but to expect to be just supported, served, although they would never say that, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But the effective, the way I have seen it over and over play out is that the woman supports the man, not the other way around, except that the man will say, like, he financially supports supports a woman. Yeah. Right.
Or physically supports her and protects her. Right.
Right. And so, like, it leads to all sorts, like with boys, when they are brought up in that, it gives them this sense of ownership over women that is just not okay. And, it's even to the point. So, wrapped around this and sort of within this is this purity culture where mm-hmm. Where not only is like sex and sexuality demonized and people are made to feel guilty and not see their body as a good thing but as a source of shame and temptation, but mm-hmm. also in this sort of toxic masculinity piece, girls are taught that that they are the temptation for men,
so true.
Right, and the men are taught the same thing, but just in the reverse. You know, like, don't stare at girls, like, don't whatever, because you know, you don't want to be tempted to lust, right? But it's but it's always about the woman, right? The
Right.
woman needs
It
to
lands on
cover
our
up.
response. Yeah, it's our responsibility to make sure this doesn't happen.
Right. Which then, when assault happens,
Yeah.
when date rape happens, when when those boundaries are pushed or whatever, the women will internalize it, and the men will dismiss it as just who we are. Right. This is we are just. It's her fault. She shouldn't have looked that way. She shouldn't have
Right.
dressed that way.
Oh yeah, I dealt with a lot of that in the church. Absolutely. Yeah, the purity thing is, I think, is way out of balance. And the last church I went to, they were very much into the purity. They had actually more for. I don't even know if they had one for the girls, but I know they had one for the boys, a purity class that they had to go through. And what was interesting is one of the leaders ended up being a wolf in sheep's clothing within the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what got to me even more, okay, they became aware of that and they didn't stop it.
Yep. Right.
Even after they became aware of it, because they didn't have enough leaders in the church to run all these ministries they had. So I guess it's better to have a toxic leader
Yeah.
than not to have the ministry at all. And I mean, it took them, when he was exposed, and it fortunately wasn't anything against the boys, but it was still,
Right.
he should not have been in ministry. They allowed him to stay in ministry for months and months and months. You know when it stopped it? Is when a woman spoke up. And then it got stopped.
Yeah, and what is unfortunate is that because of this sort of male headship, because this idea that women are the source of temptation, it causes it causes these kinds of things to be worse, because the initial response for a lot of people is like, well, what was she wearing? What was she doing? Why? What was the thing that she did to make him feel that way? And I've heard just these horrifying stories. So whenever I post about this kind of stuff on TikTok, just horrifying stories about somebody a religious professional at their church did something to them, and when they spoke up about it, they said, well, he confessed and said that he was tempted and he's gonna stop or whatever, and it never has to go through therapy or step down or like literally anything at all. Yeah.
It's so common. And you know, I know why it happened in my church. I know it's because they didn't have enough leaders.
Yeah.
And so they didn't want to, if they would remove this person, then they probably wouldn't be able to do this particular ministry. But why do you think
Right.
that the churches, because honestly, I mean, I've seen this is kind of a norm, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, and I would say that it's a norm in conservative, evangelical, and fundamentalist churches. It is not a norm in more progressive streams of Christianity. And so those places are very different. They teach very different things about the body. They teach very different things about women and their role in church. They have female pastors and female bishops, and it's a totally different animal when you go into those more progressive spaces. And I mean, everybody has their problems. This is just not one of them for those people, because for them, what they try to do is they try to teach in the way that science says, like body positivity. Love your body. Your body can do wonderful things. It can create very wonderful sensations. You don't have to be afraid of your body. Your body is not a source of temptation, right? You can enjoy your body, and no one gets to tell you what to do with your body except for you. right? And that's an important thing. So that's, in more progressive spaces, religious spaces, that's what they'll say. Like you get to choose what to do with your body, how
Yeah.
you want to enjoy your body, and how you have bodily autonomy. Nobody can do that. And you shouldn't try to take that away from anybody. Now, when it's the other side of it, in the sort of evangelical fundamentalist streams, it is, and this is, I grew up, so I'm talking firsthand knowledge of that, right? You are taught that somebody else, the pastor, the book on dating by some random person, those people get to tell you how you can use your body, right? Those people get to tell you what is okay, and you need to be afraid of and ashamed of your body, right? Our bodies are sexual, and that's one of the things, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying and exploring sexuality, right? That is, your body is made for that. And it's not just made to procreate. It feels really good. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so, but when it's externalized, right? When somebody else gets to tell you that, well, all of a sudden now we have this other layer of issues, right? Because when we are, when we move through, like, who is it that's going to tell me? Well, again, the pastor's going to tell me what I should do in my relationship with my partner, right? And all of a sudden, when we lose agency over our body and over our sexuality, that creates all kinds of really awful dynamics with partners and with ourselves. Absolutely.
Yeah, it creates, and for some, it can make them rebel.
Well, yeah, I mean,
for me, I just felt guilty, really guilty.
And that's the thing, and it doesn't, their whole thing is like, don't have sex until you're married, and then of course it's supposed to like flip off all the guilt and shame and all that stuff, which doesn't, and people struggle with that for the rest of their marriages. But the wild thing to me is that the Bible does not say that, and they will say that it does, but it just doesn't. And this is an important piece because one of the things that when you're looking at the Bible, you have to look at, like I talked about earlier, like culture. There are things that are culturally defined. Gender roles, marriage roles, sex, sexuality, all of that stuff is culturally defined.
Right.
And nobody wants a biblical marriage, right? Because a biblical marriage was when the men bought the woman from their father. The women had no rights, no agency.
No say.
Right, no say, and ultimately, so the way they understood sex was not a mutual thing, right? This was not something that was shared. It was part of the hierarchy, and so it was something that the person higher up on the social status did to a person of lower social status. It's actually, that's part of why in a Jewish culture, this one of the aspects of why they didn't two men having sex was a problem for them, was because there was supposed to be a higher and a lower. The lower received, the higher gave. And when the two men are together, it's violating that social order, right? And that social order was just deeply embedded in the way they understood God, in the way they understood faith, in the way that they expressed everything in their culture. And so, and nobody, I mean, maybe I'm sure there are some people who want that, but really, like, no healthy person wants that. A relationship where somebody's been bought, where they're treated as property. Nobody wants, if the husband dies, for the woman to have to be out on the street because she can't own property, right? And that's because that's culturally defined. So what happens is when you sort of extract the culture from the text, and
Yeah.
you are left with, okay, so what is it saying at this deeper level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can take that and you can apply it to today. But it is also really another interesting thing is men were the only people that were supposed to, in any of these moments, that were supposed to save themselves for marriage were the women. The men were not expected to do that. So, like, again, like all of this stuff that is claimed by the sort of fundamentalist purity culture, all this toxic masculinity, it's when it comes to, abstinence, for example, it's just not in the Bible. And I'm not making that up. This is academic consensus. Bible scholars all agree on this stuff. This is like just base level of modern understanding of the Bible.
Where are they pulling this from then? I mean, and I'll say I understand the culture thing, and that is something that's really important when you're reading the Bible, and you talk about it a lot in your videos, that in that passage you've got to understand the cultural layout. Then it's different than today, right?
Yeah.
But where did that come from? Because honestly, when I was in church, yes, it was all about abstaining from sex and stay pure until you're married. But and I can't think of the passage that they used to use to confirm that with me, but I just believed it.
Yep. So there's a verse, I think it's Corinthians, that says like flee from sexual immorality, right?
Right.
That they talk about sort of committing a sin against your own body. There is this passage in Genesis that is reflected that Jesus also quotes that says a man will leave his father and mother and be united with his wife, and the two will become one flesh, which sounds great. It says nothing about abstinence, right?
You're right.
And then there's a Sermon on the Mount where it says, you shall not commit adultery, but everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has committed adultery in their heart. And again, this is in this whole series of Jesus saying, like, don't be rigid, right? It's not simple. It's like don't commit murder. It's internal. It's something going on inside of you. It's not this external law that you're supposed to check a box. And that one is interesting because adultery requires somebody to be married, right?
Right.
And so it's like, and there's a lot of talk of sexual immorality, right? But that's culturally defined. Sexual immorality is culturally defined, and in those cultures, it did not mean that you were both men and women were abstaining from sex until marriage.
I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your questions about this episode, or really anything that has to do with trauma. So you can comment below, or you can reach out to me at asklisatickle@gmail.com. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you.
And it's just like, and you've mentioned some of your videos that it is not a sin to be gay or right.
Yeah.
And so, and I haven't read my Bible in a while, so forgive me.
That's fine.
But I do remember passages that talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
So clarify that for
absolutely.
me and for the listeners.
Yeah. So there's a handful of verses. There's like six Bible verses. You could add a couple here or there. But the big ones are like the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, for example. Story of Sodom and Gomorrah. I should say, just a trigger warning, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah involves sexual violence. So, if that's something for you, you might want to skip ahead a little bit and take care of yourself. But these two men come into the city of Sodom. In that culture, the way you traveled from city to city, there weren't, Holiday Inn Expresses, right? So when you showed up in a city, it was the expectation that multiple people would, when they saw you, they'd be like, oh, hey, come over to my house. You'd stay at their house. They would feed you. Then you'd go to the next city and you sort of make your way along. That's how people were able to travel. So these two men come into the city. Nobody invites them in. And it's sort of scandalous. That we would miss the scandal in our modern culture, but it would be scandalous to the people who originally heard it. So then this guy, Lot, comes up and says, hey, it's getting dark. Come to my house. Takes them to the house, feeds them. And then it says, all of the men of the city come outside of Lot's door, bang on his door, and say, put these men outside so that we can have sex with them. And Lot says no. Lot does something equally horrible in that he offers his daughter to them. The men who are actually angels in disguise stop that from happening. But let's just be clear. What is being proposed by the men outside of Lot's house is gang rape. Okay? That is not homosexuality. Okay?
Right. That's power.
That's not. That's something totally different. That is sexual violence. And that's not people meeting and falling in love and having a good time. None of that. So then you move into Leviticus. There's two verses in Leviticus. And the verb in those verses is called malakoi. I want to say I've got that right. But you can watch my verse by verse video. But basically, it's not talking about intimacy. It's talking about possibly sexual acts in worship, which would make sense in the book of Leviticus because it's a book instructing priests about worship. It's also possible that it's just like sex addiction, like sex without any boundaries. But it is that's what the verb is that's being used there. And so then you go into Romans. So that's it. That's like you've got that story in Genesis, you've got Leviticus. That's all in the Old Testament. You skip over all the things that Jesus said. You skip the book of Acts, and then there's this chapter in Romans. It says, in the first chapter of Romans, it says men gave up natural relations for unnatural ones and had sex with men, and women did the same thing, had sex with women, and here you start getting into this cultural piece, right? Because what it says is they gave up their natural inclinations, right? So in that culture, there was not a concept of homosexuality, and this is a sort of bigger piece. Like that idea is a much more modern concept that people will fall in love and will, partner and do that whole thing. In that culture, that did not exist. That concept was not there. And so it was just men and women. Now, men every once in a while engaged in sexual relationships with each other. For sure, we've got lots of records of that. But the idea of homosexuality, as we conceive of it as an orientation, is not present there. Now, if you take then, we know, in the words of the most holy Lady Gaga, blessed be she, like queer people are born that way, right? From the very beginning. And they might be attracted to the same gender. They might be attracted to all of the genders. But that's their natural orientation, right? That's what you talk to a gay man, he's going to tell you, like, no, my natural attraction is to men.
Right. I've always been attracted to men. Yeah.
Right. Always been attracted to men. A bi person will say, I've always been attracted to men and women. Right. So then when you go back to Romans and you read it, it says the men gave up their natural inclinations for unnatural ones. Well, when you sort of bring that into this modern understanding, well, that means that like gay people, their natural inclination is towards the same gender, then it would be a sin for them to not do that, but to engage in relationships with somebody of the opposite gender, because they're violating who they are, right?
Right.
So that's the book of Romans. And then there's two more in Timothy and Corinthians. where it's like a list of sins.
Yeah.
And this is important because if you go to an accurate translation, the most accurate as far as biblical scholars are concerned is the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. You won't see the word homosexuality in these lists. They will. They're. It's called. I want to say. Anyway, it's something else, not homosexuality, because it's like indecent acts or something like that, but a little bit more extreme. And what happened is like when the earlier translators were translating, they read their own definition of what men engaging in illicit acts would be, and they put homosexuality in there. Now, it is interesting that one of those in 1 Timothy, the first place, when the first time homosexuality appears in the scripture, in an English translation, because it's actually a pretty new word.
That's what I thought. It wasn't known.
Yeah,
in the beginning.
Right. It's not a word that was used, but the first time it appears, it's really interesting. We have a record of that translation committee, right? They keep all their documentations in the 1940s, and when that appeared, there's one of the like assistants sent a note to one of the translators and said, "Hey, I think this is the wrong word." And the translator said, "Actually, yeah, it's the wrong word. We need to fix that," and it didn't. So this guy went back and tried to say, okay, what was in that Timothy passage? When you go back in time, you look at the translations that happened before that one, right? You look in German, you look in French, look at what Martin Luther did, all that kind of stuff. There is a consistent term across these different languages, and it's a term for adults having sex with children, right? And so, which it shouldn't have to be said, but homosexuality is not pedophilia. It's not.
Correct.
It's not the same thing.
I was raised to believe that was true. Woo,
yes,
and I never knew that to be true.
Right. And the perpetuation of that lie, oh my gosh, it's horrible.
Right?
Yeah. And that's it. That's all the verses. And I don't know, what did that take? 10 minutes? 15 minutes? But you want to talk about like how many verses it talks about in the Bible about being kind to immigrants and foreigners. There's a lot more of that. You want to talk about
even
loving,
about your mind, even when how much it mentions in there about your mind.
Yep. Or how about taking care of the poor and the needy? Like,
yes,
how there's so many laws. There's so much about like when somebody is hungry, how the culture, how the government, how the church is required to function so that those people are not homeless. Those people have food and all their basic needs met, right? There's so much more in the Bible about that than about anything that could possibly be homosexuality. Yeah, you're getting me on my soapbox. I'm sorry.
No, I'm right there with you, 100%. And yet we focus on that, and and I'll be honest. In the years that I was in church, and I was even told don't even hang out with gay people, and I'm like, it never sat well with me ever.
Yeah.
And and I always ended up having friends anyway that were gay, and just figured, oh well. And then as I stepped away from the church, it's like, I've had the most wonderful people in my life, and some of them are gay, and they have been wonderful and have enriched my life, and I would have missed out on that. And they don't have to answer to me about what they're doing in their life. I am not God. I'm not Holy Ghost Jr. You don't have to answer to me. But we just miss out so much on that, and this thing of turning against them and growing up. I can remember sitting around the table and listening to my parents and talk to their friends about, the gays want to get into the schools and they want to be teachers. You know why? Because they want to convert the kids. And I thought,
that's just,
as young as I was, I thought, that sounds, I didn't say anything, but I thought that sounded so bizarre to me. How do you convert someone?
Right. And I can tell you, as a person who's part of the queer community, that sort of toxic masculinity, it's sort of it's called, we'll talk about internalized homophobia, and
Yeah.
this idea that like, because you're supposed to be butch and masculine, whatever, there's this constant editing of yourself, so that you, like, if you, oh gosh, that sounded gay, that did not sound masculine, I need to deepen my voice,
Yes.
I need to whatever, or like, oh gosh, I was standing in this weird way, right? Or like, I was looking at that person of the same gender, and like, oh my gosh, I need to stop staring at them, I need to start staring at these other people. And like, there is this just like,
Oh, that's awful.
that for kids, for boys and girls, that kind of that toxic masculinity and heteronormative, when there's this heteronormative expectation that is wrapped in this toxic masculinity, I mean, it's deeply damaging, and then living for a lot of basically, you know, like, what you were taught is that like, oh, that's a temptation, right? You are being tempted towards this sin, and your whole life you are internalizing, oh my gosh, this is I'm just a horrible person, I can't let go of this temptation, whatever, and you are pretending to be this person that you're not, but you're not just pretending. So it's interesting for people who did not grow up in that stream of Christianity. There is a sense of being in the closet that is really difficult. But in these very conservative Christian streams, when you are growing up in that as a queer person, it's not just trying to hide that from other people, trying to pretend with other people that you are a butch masculine guy.
You're trying to convince yourself.
Trying to pretend to yourself as well.
Yeah.
Because you're told that's not who you are. It can't possibly be who you are. So you need to be who you really are, which is this, you know, guy who lifts weights and, you know, plays football.
Right. You know, and I think you may have touched on this on one of your videos, or it was something else that I watched, where, you know, there's churches that try to send you off to places to convert you, right?
Yep. Conversion therapy. Yeah.
Oh, I can't imagine how hard that's got to be.
Yeah, and I have I've known people who went through that. I was working with teenagers at a time. I had this wild story where a gay kid at a Baptist church, they didn't have a youth pastor. He put a note underneath a plant that got moved to be cleaning, saying, I think I might be gay and I need to talk to somebody, and put his cell phone number on there. And for whatever reason, I'm going to go with God, the Holy Spirit, the universe, whatever. Whoever found that, whoever they gave it to, said, well, we don't have a youth pastor. Let's call this large Methodist church, and eventually got to me. And so I met with that kid, and we began, you know, talking about who he was and just being a mentor, trying to get him with a therapist. And as that was happening, they got a youth pastor at the Baptist church that then he felt like, well, now that I have a youth pastor, I should submit to this youth pastor's authority and to be talking to him instead of you. So
Oh, no.
the way it goes, he goes to that person. Years later, I see that Baptist youth pastor, and he said, you should call this kid, who is now a young adult. And so I did, and we met for coffee. He was getting ready to marry this wonderful guy that he had fallen in love with. But he told me that he was sent to conversion therapy twice, and the statistics are clear. The only correlation in conversion therapy is the people attempting suicide. and he
I
did
was
it
just gonna
twice.
say,
Yeah.
oh my God. I was gonna say, I bet that, yeah. Oh my God. Well, thank God he didn't.
Well, he tried, but he failed. Yeah, tried twice. And this is
Mm,
my look, Lisa, I there are so many beliefs that people can have that
mm-hmm.
don't kill children, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
The Trevor Project has this research out when when kids come out, there's a 15% chance that they're going to try to commit suicide. When they come out and are rejected by religious parents on religious grounds, that doubles. It's 30%. And
Oh my gosh.
so like it's literally, so this belief is literally killing children. Like I just don't understand how, if that is the result of your belief, you just don't tell other people that you believe that at the very, but or just like don't believe it. Choose a different belief, because you could choose all these other weird ass beliefs, right?
Mm-hmm.
That don't make kids try to kill themselves. So
Yeah.
choose those weird beliefs, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
And that's where the toxic masculinity, where the rubber meets the road,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not just unhealthy and traumatizing, and it doesn't just cause create norms that excuse predatory behavior. It actually causes kids to try to kill themselves.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just, yeah.
And in a best case scenario, they're living in deep depression and
Right. Yeah.
anxiety. They're getting through life every day and suffering every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't end up ending their lives, but they end up being miserable.
Oh,
And
yeah.
oh my God, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one threw me off. I'm
Sorry.
sure that no,
Yeah.
no, 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 this is good. I want to talk about this stuff. This stuff needs to get out there. And,
Yeah.
and I think that even when I think about back in the day when I was faithfully following, there were
Right.
so many times that this stuff didn't line up with me,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew well, there were times I actually did say stuff and I
Yeah.
got people turned against me. I mean, I got a divorce and I even was told that that was sin.
Oh, right. No, yeah, for sure.
I had
Those
people
streams of
absolutely
Christianity.
turn
Yeah.
against me because even though, my ex-husband up and abandoned the family and left and we
Right.
didn't know where he was at and didn't
Right.
know what he was doing and I needed to protect myself as well as my family. And
Yeah.
believe me, it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do.
I'm
Walking
sure.
up to that clerk and handing them the paperwork. I was
Mm-hmm.
bawling my eyes out. That's not what
I
I
bet.
wanted. And
Yeah.
what I got from the church was oh, well, how's your relationship with God?
Oh my God.
It's great, And I literally had, as soon as I told one of my friends that I was considering filing for divorce, I was told, well, I can't be your friend anymore. And she cut
Yeah.
me off right there.
Yeah. Yeah. It is wild. I have this podcast called Unbelief, and we do like a progressive teaching on an ancient spiritual text on
Oh,
Sundays, and then we do an interview with people, either scholars or people who are deconstructing. And recently, we did this 2-part episode of this guy, this young adult who was gay in the Southern Baptist Church, was a deacon, and there's an organization in that stream of Christianity that their focus, their purpose, is to find queer pastors in the closet and out them to their congregation. And his story, I just would say, it's fascinating. It's horrifying, but it is. If anybody ever wants to sort of get in the inside of what that experience is,
mm-hmm.
and it's his name is Austin. He's I met him on TikTok, and yeah, it's horrifying, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he lost everything.
I mean, we're okay with running people into the ground because they don't have the same beliefs as us. And I
Right.
had people telling me like, you can't listen to this kind of music, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and again, you can't hang out with gays because you might turn into them.
Yeah. Right.
I was just like, this sounds great, but I couldn't say, well, I would say a little bit, but I'd get a lot of pushback. And of course,
Yeah.
I was in the people pleasing mode, so I'm certainly not going to push back real hard. But that
Mhm.
was one of the many reasons why I stepped away from the church.
Yeah.
I was tired of man telling me how I could live my life, and it didn't line up with me.
No.
It did
Right.
not line up with me. And I'm telling you, I've had a tight relationship with God as far back as I can remember. I used to go in the little Sunday school bus all by myself at 5 years old. No
That's
parents,
so
nobody
sweet.
else. It was really sweet. And I was so excited. I loved to go. So I don't even know who introduced me to God. It's always been my relationship. I've just
Yeah.
had a long relationship. And I've always relied on him. And there was a period of time, actually, after I went through my divorce, where I questioned my trust, or like trusting myself. And it was really unnerving. And since then, and I've done a lot of healing, I learned to trust myself more. And as I trust myself more and I listen to that voice inside of me and I listen and I follow, my life has been so much better. And my life has been enriched by amazing people that
Right.
if I had still been in the church, I wouldn't even give them the second chance.
Right. And I know we're sort of coming to the end of our time
Yes.
here, but I I think that what you're talking about is one of the most important realizations that people have when they grew up in this stream that was focused on isolating them and making them
Mm-hmm.
scared and ashamed. It is that at some point people will come to this realization that, hang on, I have just inherited these beliefs,
Right.
right? And and that's not healthy, because what we need to do, what we actually everybody really does, is they choose their beliefs. And you get to choose your beliefs. And the
Mm-hmm.
beliefs that you should choose are the beliefs that help you become the best version of yourself, and the
Exactly.
beliefs that give you a purpose greater than yourself. And like and and once people realize that, I mean, it's hard. You were just talking, it's hard work, right? To go back and
Mm-hmm.
start evaluating and saying, okay, I don't believe this, and now what do I believe, right? But man, there is so much life there.
There is, and it's a tough road. It is difficult. But if you hang in there,
Yeah,
it's so worth it. So I have one question I always like to ask my guests.
great.
What would you like to leave our listeners with?
Um, it's your life. It's your life, and um, no one, no one should get to tell you who to be or how to love, um, except for you. No one gets to tell you what to believe about God, how is
Mm-hmm.
the right way to connect with God. Like, nobody gets to do that. You can ask people their opinion, you
Mm-hmm.
can accept advice, but it's you. And I just want to say, like, man, where however much life you have spent on somebody else's terms, you can let go, and live it on your terms. Live the life that you want. Love the people that you want,
Yeah.
and wherever that takes you, it'll be a place that you have decided to go, and not someone else has decided for you.
Beautifully said. So if our listeners wanted to reach out to you, how can they? We'll have this in the show notes, but why don't you share with us real quick how they could connect with you?
Sure. You can Skeptic Pastor on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok is a place. I also have this community of spiritual people that we call Not Church. And it's not church. Somebody said it's like church in that, like, it's all the things that you're looking for in a church, where people are talking about spiritual things, and and
Ooh.
they're there for each other, like they're holding space for each other when difficult things happen. But nobody is telling you that you're going to hell because you've got tarot cards on your bedside table, and so it's this beautiful community of people like that. And that's patreon.com/skepticpastor. We charge $3 a month because we're not asking anyone to donate money. You, if it works for you, great. If it doesn't work, you just stop paying, and you pay for what you get.
I am going to check that out.
You should.
Well,
You
thank
would
you.
love
Oh,
it there.
I know, seriously, I am. I actually am going to check that out. I'm excited about that. I'm glad that there's a community like that, like me, out
Right?
there. Yeah, exactly.
That's
It's beautiful.
that's what everybody says when they log in for the first time. Like, oh my gosh, thank you. I finally found a place with people like me. And
Yes, I found home. I found home. I love it.
yeah,
Oh, well, thank you, Jeremy, for sharing. And yeah, this has been really interesting. I'm sure we could go another hour or more, but thank you so much for being here.
yeah, absolutely.